Welcome to the Teachers Talkin' podcast, hosted by Dustin and Ghazali Abdul Wahab. In this podcast, we discuss all things education and teaching, from innovative teaching methods to challenges to strategies and much, much more. In this discussion or roundtable-based podcast, we bring in educators from all around the world to talk about a variety of education topics so that we can support as many teachers as possible. We want this to be a place of inspiration, personal and professional development, and simply a place where we can elevate education together. Welcome to Teachers Talkin'. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Teachers Talkin'. I'm Dustin, joined by my co-host Ghazali, and today's conversation is going to center around a simple but powerful idea of how positive reinforcement can shape learning. Our guiding question for this episode is, how can positive reinforcement reshape the way that students experience learning and behavior in school? You know, this is something we talk about often, but what does it actually look like in classrooms, and what's at stake when we don't get it right? So to help us unpack this, we're joined by Mirriam Chintu, an educator based in Zambia who brings over 2 decades of experience to the conversation. She's currently teaching English at the junior secondary level and is deeply invested in teacher development and student support. So before we get into your thoughts on positive reinforcement, Mirriam, can you just walk us a little bit through your education journey? You know, what's the path that brought you into education, and how has your thinking about classroom relationships evolved over years?
Okay, so my journey as a teacher began in 2000 when I graduated from college and went into teaching. From there, I learned a lot of methodologies, experiences, and the like. For now, I've got about 24 years of teaching experience, and I did my master's in education, administration, and management, which I graduated last month. Uh, in all this, my interest has been in the way teachers have been delivering their lessons, and how do we help learners to learn without frustrating them, without infringing their rights. And I discovered to say positive reinforcement is one of the strategies that has worked well for me. And I would encourage many educators and teachers to implement positive reinforcement. Thank you. So when we talk of positive reinforcement, the first time I discovered concerning positive reinforcement was when I had an encounter in class with a pupil. There was this stubborn pupil. I wouldn't want to mention names now, but then I discovered to say the pupil was helped by showing kindness to this pupil and encouraging them when they do the right things. I would reward them with the methods of positive reinforcement. And I noticed to say that the performance began to change in concerning this pupil. So that's what I can talk about my journey and discovery of positive reinforcement.
Wow, you certainly have a lot of experience there. So, my main question is that how do students' home lives and backgrounds show up in the classroom? Basically, what has shaped the way you approach teaching and behavior?
Okay. Um, when I talk of positive reinforcement being a strategy that we need to use as teachers, I've discovered to say that when we implement positive reinforcement, the learners begin to have self-confidence and their self-esteem is also encouraged, and their motivation is boosted. So things I can talk about, and I have seen a lot of transformation concerning my learners in that area. Thank you.
think you're muted, Ghazali.
Yeah, can you share a moment where a student's behavior made more sense once you understood their background?
Um, when I understood their background, because learners come from different backgrounds. Some of them, they do not even have positive motivation from their parents or their guardians. They are talked of, undermined, and sometimes their behavior is because they want to defend themselves. And sometimes their behavior comes as a result of trying to prove something about themselves. But when they reach an environment where there is this educator, this teacher, who positively reinforces um, ideas in them, activities in them, you find that they begin to change despite their background.
You know, it makes me think about, we're really on the dichotomy of two things, right? Whether we're using positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. And it seems like not that it's by fault or on purpose, but so many people seem to divert to negative reinforcement. So especially early in teaching careers, because we don't know any better way of like addressing situations when things get hot, right? So can you tell us some ways that, maybe you've seen negative reinforcement affect students, whether that's been in your own classroom or in classrooms that you've visited?
Um, can you ask that question again?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if you can tell us about some ways that you've seen negative reinforcement actually have an impact on students, whether that's from, your own classroom or, visiting other classrooms.
Okay, so I have seen situations where negative reinforcement has affected our learners in my class. And maybe I can say that was the foundation of me changing into positive reinforcement, because negative reinforcement, it is not actually just punishment, but it is a way of taking away something that a child or a learner desires. Um, for example, you find that negative reinforcement can be you tell a learner to say you are not going out for break, or you raise your voice against a learner, or you um, embarrass a learner who gives a wrong answer. All those are negative reinforcements. So when I noticed to say this was damaging the esteem of learners, and it was also not encouraging them to perform well in their classwork, I decided to change the strategy and bring about positive reinforcement. So I have witnessed what negative reinforcement can actually do.
Can you tell us, maybe give us an example or tell us a little bit of a story about a time where you saw how a student became discouraged because of that negative reinforcement, like the impact that had on the child?
Okay. I remember in 2006, I was teaching at a Christian school. And then it so happened that there was one child who was quite unruly and very discouraging, because this was a child who would not adhere to the class rules. This was a child that would make your teaching very difficult. So what happened was, one time I decided to send the child out of the classroom because of the behavior, which was very toxic. And it resulted in this child wanting to leave the school. And I felt bad as a teacher, because this came as a result of me impressing negative reinforcement on the child. So afterwards, I tried to call the parents using the counseling skills that I had gotten from my education, and sat the child down. I realized to say this child was just lacking attention. So after I began to use positive reinforcement, encouraging this child, letting this child know to say he can improve in his grades, he can do better, he's accepted, this child began to love school. So those were one of the experiences that I had.
That's incredible. That's really an incredible story. I mean, and nice little turnaround, and it's sad and also uplifting at the same time. But it makes me think about
Yeah.
how often situations like that take place in schools, and what
Mm.
would you say would be like the long-term effects on student identity when people revert to negative reinforcement?
Hmm. The first thing that I can say is when we use negative reinforcement in our classroom management or in dealing with learners, we find that they lose their self-esteem, and you find that they grow up even in the work environment. There are these people who feel they cannot because the voice of telling them they cannot do it or punishment keeps on ringing in their brains. And then the other negative effect of negative reinforcement is that the child loses motivation and they grow up unmotivated. They feel there's nothing that they can do better. Like they don't have a reason to try. And the other negative effect of negative reinforcement is you just stop the child from advancing because they would feel like this is the end. Then the other negative effect of negative reinforcement, they become rebellious because they are trying to also protect themselves and they're also trying to defend themselves. So rebellion can also be a result of negative reinforcement.
Okay, that sounds really instructive, because it's so easy to use negative reinforcement most of the time because most of the time you're just reacting to the student. So let's talk about what works. How do you use positive reinforcement in your classroom?
So when we talk of positive reinforcement, we are talking about the types of reinforcement that I use. There is praise reinforcement, where I use verbal reinforcement, I should say, like giving praise to a child for the good behaviors that they have done. And the other one that I also implement in is tangible rewards. For example, you can place stickers on their books. You can give them a star. You can give them a reward, a physical reward. So those are some of the positive reinforcement. And then the other thing is social rewards, where you tell a child to say, because of their good behavior, they tend to choose where to sit and who to talk to for 2 minutes or things like that. And then the other type of positive reinforcement is where you give them privileges. For example, you tell them to say, because of your good behavior, you are going to have extra 2 minutes for break. So those are the things that I've noticed to say they have helped me as in implementing positive reinforcement.
That's nice. I mean, I do use many of those same strategies as well. So maybe you dive a bit
Mhm.
deeper. What are some of the things you say, or what are the phrases or responses that you use to help your students, in overcoming their difficulties? And what are the things that you do to reinforce these positive reinforcements?
Okay, so some of the phrases I use is, you can do it. Okay, and if a child has done something wrong, the best way is not to tell them to say, you haven't, your answer is wrong. That demoralizes the child. So what you do is when a child has given a wrong answer or the behavior is not right, you call them and tell them to say, try again. And when you give them that hope to say when they try again, they'll get it right. They have this motivation of trying it again. So those are the things that I can say I use. Those are the phrases I use.
So how would you say by making this shift to positive reinforcement that it's actually made a change on you as a teacher?
Positive reinforcement has made a change on me as a teacher because it has given me an opportunity to grow my patience. You really need to have patience because without patience, it is difficult to implement positive reinforcement. And kindness also. It takes kindness to show kindness to the learners. So those are some of the things I've discovered have brought some change in me. And the other thing is every time I face a challenging situation concerning a learner, I am very positive to say something good is going to come out of the child. I have got so much trust in my learners to say there's a possibility that they will change and they will achieve more. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to take away when you think about the way that that changes us just as human beings, even not just as teachers, you know, the patience, being patient with others, being kind with others. It can really change not just our own outlook, but the outlook of others as well. Would you say that there was, you know, what was the moment, I guess, where you saw that mindset shift for yourself? You know, where did where did you first have that experience where you were like, the way I'm doing things is not working and I need to be more positive? Or have you always been, you know, that type of a person?
I've not always been that type of a person. Um, But the change came in 2006, like I explained earlier. When I faced that challenge I explained concerning a child, that's when I said, I'm not doing things right. I need to change my strategy because I discovered to say my relationship with the learners began to I began to separate from my learners because of the way I was treating them and with the way I was taking discipline and with the way I thought I was helping them advancing in their education. So I discovered to say this was disturbing my relationship with my learners. So the moment I began to implement positive reinforcement, I noticed that my relationship with the learners got stronger and I had access to them and I had access in the way they were thinking sometimes because of the behaviors they would portray later on. Yes.
So what, you know, were there any particular steps that you took, or like how did you go about making that shift? Like when you had that realization moment with that student and you were like, oh, I need to be better in the classroom, you started making those changes. Like how did you go about making those changes? And you know, how long did it take before you started to see that change in yourself and that change in the relationship with your students?
Because actually what happened was after that experience, I sat down and began to realize to say there are a lot of things that I need to change, but I didn't know where to start from. So I began to ask my fellow teachers, like, what do you do in case a child behaves like this? How do you help the behaviors of the learners? And then I discovered some would tell me to say, you change the strategy, you show kindness. So I began to read more about that. I began to find materials, books that were talking about classroom management and especially on positive reinforcement. And that helped me. I can say it took about 8 months for me to change actually and began to see the results. Yeah.
Wow, so there was a transformative impact upon you, and you keep mentioning this date 2006. What's specifically that triggered this change in you in that year 2006?
My experience, what triggered the change
Yeah.
with with it was the experience I had with one of the learners. Um, like I mentioned to say, there was this learner who was quite stubborn. And the moment that I chased that learner from my classroom, the performance of that learner just dropped, the grades dropped. And later on, I discovered to say the learner never wanted to come to my classroom because he
Mm.
didn't see himself being a better
Yeah.
child. So that
Yeah.
touched my heart to realize to say, okay, there's this person that I'm supposed to impact knowledge in, but they're deciding to leave my classroom because I'm not being any good to them. So that's what triggered the whole transformation.
And so, when you see that the positive change due to your transformation, I'm
Mhm.
interested to know what would it look like for an entire school to really embrace positive reinforcement, not just in a classroom maybe, but in terms of leadership and culture. What would it look like?
Um, if every teacher would be committed to implement positive reinforcement, I believe would have a group of learners who are going to be self-motivated, whose self-esteem is going to be high, and whose behavior is going to change. Because what positive reinforcement does, it encourages good behavior. So, for example, you are in a classroom or you are at the school. Let me give an example of the whole school. And then there's this learner from the next class, and this learner behaves in a good way. A teacher from a different class recognizes the good behavior of that child and rewards that child. The other learners around the school will also be motivated to do the right thing because of the reward that that child has received.
Mm. So, what advice would you give to a teacher who wants to start using positive reinforcement, but perhaps maybe they work in a school that leans heavily on punishment?
Mm.
Um, when change is coming, it actually takes individuals to implement change. If you wait for the whole group to change, the change will not come. So if that particular teacher would want to implement positive reinforcement, I would encourage that teacher to begin implementing the positive reinforcement. And I'm sure the news will go around the school. And you find that even the school administration will be interested to know what is happening in that particular class. Because these learners, they'll talk about their teachers. When they're outside, they'll talk about their teachers. Some of them, they even show the disregard to their friends concerning their teachers. Oh, my teacher punished me because I did this. Oh, my teacher loves me because I did this. My teacher gave me a sweet. My teacher gave me a candy. My teacher gave me a sticker because I did this. And as they share the information, you find that even the teachers will start wanting to know what is happening in that classroom. So let that teacher begin as an individual. That's what I can say.
Miriam, can you tell us maybe what is one thing that you wish every teacher or school leader understood about the impact of positive reinforcement?
What I would want to say to every teacher is that positive reinforcement is the best strategy in managing your learners and encouraging your learners. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories and your strategies regarding positive reinforcement. It's been really helpful and a really nice conversation. It's not like I mentioned before we started, positive reinforcement's not something that we have had a chance to talk a lot about, but it is a critical part of a classroom. If we're going to build those strong relationships with students and really get them learning, then we have to be encouraging them and not damaging them with negative behavior. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. And we really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirriam.
And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Remember to tag us. We would love to hear your stories in the comments. What are your stories of using positive reinforcement in the classroom? But as always, subscribe, rate, share below. If you would like to be a guest on Teachers Talkin', we are always looking for educators to share their stories. You can click the link in the show notes. You do not need to be an expert in anything, just passionate about education and wanting to talk about teaching. So thank you so much for being here. Ghazali, thank you. And we will talk to you all next time.